After 4 long years at war, he finally returns home. But what he finds at the train station leaves him speechless. His wife, once full of life, is now homeless. Yet somehow she has been waiting for him all this time. How did she survive? What secret kept her holding on? Stay with me, because the truth will shock you and touch your heart like nothing else. Thank you for listening to this heartfelt story. If it moved you, please like, share it, comments below, and let someone know you are never alone. 4 long years of war lived inside my bones. Gunpowder, cold nights, letters I read 100 times under dim lantern light. Every letter carried her name, Sarah. My heart beat faster as my boots touched the platform. The town looked smaller, quieter, older. Wind pushed dry leaves across the road like forgotten memories. I walked past the bakery where we once laughed over sweet bread, past the wooden church where we promised forever. My chest felt tight. Then I saw her. At first, my mind refused the truth. A woman sat beside the station wall, thin blanket, bare hands trembling in the cold air, her hair tangled by wind and dust. People passed her as if she belonged to the shadows. My breath froze. The world shrank into one terrible moment. Her eyes lifted slowly. Those eyes, the same soft brown eyes that once looked at me with laughter under summer skies. Sarah, my Sarah. Shock burned through my chest like lightning. 4 years of war never prepared my heart for this sight. I stepped closer. The smell of cold pavement and rain filled the air. She looked at me as if time itself stood still. Then a small smile appeared on her tired face, soft, gentle, full of a love that never faded. Tears gathered in her eyes. I knew you would come back. Her voice carried warmth even through hunger and hardship. My hands trembled. Questions stormed inside my mind. Where was the home I built for her? Where were the neighbors who once called her family? Where were the promises this town made when I marched away? Her story unfolded slowly between quiet breaths. My absence invited cruel whispers. A lonely woman became an easy target for judgment. Work vanished, friends faded. The house disappeared piece by piece until only the open sky remained. Yet she stayed. Every morning she waited near the station. Every evening she whispered my name into the wind. Faith stronger than hunger, love stronger than shame. I knelt beside her. The ground felt cold through my uniform. My arms wrapped around her fragile shoulders. In that moment, the war finally ended inside my soul. Around us, the town continued its busy rhythm, but something deeper stirred in the air. A few strangers paused. An old man placed warm bread beside her blanket. A woman removed her shawl and covered Sarah's shoulders. Kindness moved quietly from heart to heart. And as I held the woman who carried my name through storms of loneliness and courage, I began to understand the true battle waiting for me here in this silent frontier town, where love endured every trial, and my journey beside her opened into a path of redemption that stretched far beyond the war and into a future where patience, forgiveness, and gentle strength slowly rebuilt the life that once slipped through our fingers, while the evening sun spread golden light across the station, and Sarah rested her head against my shoulder, whispering dreams of tomorrow, while my heart listened carefully to every fragile breath and prepared to rise with her into the long road ahead, where love continued growing stronger with every step we took together through the quiet streets of our waiting town. The evening wind moved gently through the quiet streets of the frontier town. Sarah rested beside me, her head against my shoulder, her breathing soft and slow. The golden light of the setting sun touched her tired face. 4 years of war lived inside my memory, yet the deepest wound stood here before my eyes.
A woman who loved me enough to wait through storms, whispers, and hunger. People slowly gathered near the station. Curious eyes, quiet footsteps, the soft murmur of voices. An old woman placed a cup of warm tea into Sarah's hands. Steam rose into the cool evening air. Sarah held the cup carefully, as if warmth itself felt unfamiliar. Her fingers trembled. I looked around the town. Familiar buildings stood like silent witnesses. The wooden store where we bought candles. The small stable where I once worked before the war. The church bell rang in the distance, a deep sound rolling across the valley. Memories returned like waves. Sarah's voice broke the silence. Soft, gentle, filled with patience. I waited every day near this station. Her eyes looked toward the railway tracks stretching into the horizon. Every train carried hope. The words pressed against my chest with quiet force. The cold ground beneath my knees reminded me how much she endured. Wind carried the smell of dust and distant rain. A man stepped forward from the crowd. His face carried regret. He placed a loaf of bread beside us. Another woman followed, then another. Kindness slowly replaced the silence. Small gestures, warm eyes, careful voices. Sarah watched them with quiet surprise. Pain lived inside her story, yet bitterness found no home in her heart. Her hand gently touched mine. Thin fingers, warm skin, the same touch I remembered beneath summer stars long ago. My mind searched for answers. Who allowed this suffering? Who watched her lose everything? The truth lingered somewhere in the quiet town around us. Shadows stretched across the wooden streets. Lanterns slowly lit along the road. Their golden glow painted soft circles of light on the ground. Sarah looked toward the church tower rising above the rooftops. A distant memory moved across her eyes. "There was a day when everything changed," she whispered. The words carried a strange weight. A few people in the crowd lowered their gaze. The wind shifted. A door somewhere across the street creaked open. Heavy footsteps echoed slowly on the wooden boards. The sound moved closer, closer. Sarah's fingers tightened around my hand. Her breathing grew slower. Her eyes fixed on the dark shape approaching through the lantern light, while the town grew quiet again, and every step across the wooden street carried a truth that waited 4 long years to stand before me, as the figure moved forward out of the shadow, and the people nearby stepped aside, while my heart began to pound against my ribs. And Sarah's voice barely rose above the wind as she whispered the name of the man whose arrival changed the course of our lives, and whose presence carried the secret that slowly unfolded during the long nights after I marched to war, when promises began to break, and quiet decisions inside this town pushed her toward the cold streets beside the station, where hope remained the only thing she protected with stubborn faith, while the approaching figure stopped beneath the lantern glow and lifted his face toward me, revealing eyes that carried guilt heavy enough to bend his shoulders as the silence deepened, and the truth waiting inside this moment slowly began to breathe between us, while Sarah held my hand with gentle strength, and the past prepared to open its long hidden story inside the quiet frontier night, where love, patience, and courage stood ready to face whatever waited beyond the next spoken word. And the crowd leaned closer, listening to the wind moving through the empty tracks, as the man drew one careful breath and began to speak about the day when everything changed after the letter arrived from the battlefield carrying news that shattered the town and placed Sarah's life on a path of hardship that still lived inside the dust of these streets, where my return now awakened questions stronger than fear, and the fragile beginning of a truth that had waited through every season since the war began to unfold in the quiet light of the frontier evening, where our story continued moving forward step by step through the listening town and into the long night ahead, where every word slowly revealed the hidden trials Sarah carried with quiet dignity, while I stood beside her, ready to hear every piece of the past that still shaped the road stretching before us through the silent valley and toward the uncertain dawn that waited beyond the hills.
The man stood beneath the lantern. Its trembling light revealed a face I remembered. Thomas, the town clerk. His shoulders sagged under a weight heavier than years. The crowd held its breath. Sarah's hand rested inside mine, warm yet fragile. Thomas cleared his throat. The dry sound echoed through the silent street. His eyes moved between Sarah and me. Regret lived inside them. "Your letter arrived 4 winters ago," he said slowly. Cold wind brushed across the platform. My heart pounded harder. Thomas continued. "The army courier brought news after a brutal battle." His voice trembled. "The message said you fell in combat." The words struck the air like thunder. A quiet murmur moved through the crowd. Sarah's hand rested inside mine, warm yet fragile. Thomas cleared his throat. The dry sound echoed through the silent street. His eyes moved between Sarah and me. Regret lived inside them. The town believed the message. Lantern light shook in the wind. "The house you built together stood empty." His voice grew softer. Debts followed. Taxes. Pressure from men who cared more about property than mercy. My jaw tightened. Sarah's fingers squeezed mine gently. Thomas spoke again. Many people tried to help her. He looked toward the gathered townsfolk. But rumors grew faster than kindness. The wind carried the distant cry of a night bird. Some said a young widow brought bad luck. Several people shifted uncomfortably. Thomas lowered his head. The bank claimed the land. Sarah listened quietly. No anger, only deep patience. "She refused to leave the town," Thomas continued. "She waited near the station every day." My chest tightened. Thomas lifted his eyes again. 1 year passed, then another. Every train arrived with strangers, yet she kept watching the doors. Sarah whispered softly beside me. "I knew your heart still beat somewhere under the same sky." Her voice carried calm certainty. The lantern flickered brighter as wind slowed. Thomas stepped closer. "There was another truth I never shared." The crowd leaned forward. My pulse hammered inside my ears. Thomas opened a worn leather satchel. Papers rustled in the quiet night. He removed a folded document, old, weathered, the edges worn by time. This arrived months after the first message. My breath slowed. Thomas unfolded the paper carefully. The army corrected the report. Silence deepened around us. "They confirmed you survived." The crowd gasped softly. Thomas's voice dropped to a whisper. But fear controlled me. His hands trembled. I believed telling the truth would create chaos after the property already changed hands. A heavy stillness spread through the street. Sarah lifted her head slowly. Lantern light touched her eyes. Gentle strength shone there. Thomas continued speaking, while distant clouds drifted across the moon, and the quiet town listened to every word falling into the night air, where truth moved carefully through the gathered people. And the sound of the document unfolding carried the weight of years that shaped Sarah's suffering beside the station.
while the frontier wind moved across the empty tracks, and the paper inside Thomas's shaking hands revealed more lines of ink that waited patiently to change the story of this town, while Sarah's calm voice prepared to answer the confession that now lived between us, and the watching crowd stood silent beneath the lantern glow, as the next breath carried the beginning of another revelation, slowly rising from the fragile page and drifting into the cool darkness of the frontier evening, where our lives continued unfolding step by step along the dusty street beside the station, while the past opened wider and the long-hidden truth prepared to speak again through Thomas's trembling voice and the quiet strength in Sarah's eyes as the paper lifted slightly in the wind, and the next words began to emerge into the waiting silence of the town that once believed the war had taken me forever, and now stood on the edge of understanding the deeper cost of the choice that followed that first terrible message delivered on a winter morning when everything changed, and Sarah's long vigil beside the station truly began, while the lantern light continued to sway above us, and the story pressed forward into the gathering night where more voices and memories slowly prepared to step out from the shadows of the frontier town and into the fragile circle of light where truth had finally begun to breathe again. The paper trembled slightly in Thomas's hands. Lantern light slid across the faded ink. My eyes fixed on the page, yet my ears listened to the quiet breathing of the crowd. Sarah remained beside me, calm, steady. Her strength felt deeper than any battlefield courage I carried home. Thomas inhaled slowly. "The correction arrived in early spring," he said. Wind moved softly along the empty railway tracks. "But by then, the land had already changed ownership." His voice carried shame. "The bank sold the house." A murmur moved through the people gathered near the station. I pictured the small wooden porch, the chair where Sarah once read letters from me, the garden she planted beside the fence, all gone. Thomas lifted the paper slightly. "The officer who wrote this report confirmed your survival after the battle." My chest tightened. A strange mixture of relief and sorrow moved through me. 4 years of waiting, 4 years of silence. Sarah spoke gently. Hope never left my heart. Her voice sounded soft as evening wind. "I felt your life somewhere beyond the mountains." Several people lowered their heads. An old farmer stepped closer to the lantern light. His weathered hat rested against his chest. "We believed the first message," he said quietly. "Fear makes people careless with kindness." His words hung in the air. Sarah looked at him with the same quiet grace she carried through every hardship. Thomas folded the document slowly. "There is more written here." The crowd leaned nearer again. Lantern light flickered across thoughtful faces. My pulse beat slower now, yet something inside the moment continued building. Thomas opened the final fold of the paper. A second sheet slipped free. Older ink, a different handwriting. "The officer added a personal note," Thomas explained. He cleared his throat. "The army discovered something after the battle." A distant horse neighed somewhere beyond the town road. Night deepened across the valley. Thomas read carefully. "The message sent to this town carried a mistaken identity." My breath paused. The words echoed strangely inside my mind. "The soldier believed dead that winter wore your uniform." Sarah's fingers tightened gently around my hand. Thomas looked up. "The man who fell in that battle traveled through this town weeks before joining the army." The crowd exchanged confused glances. Lantern shadows moved slowly across the wooden street. Thomas continued speaking, while the quiet frontier night wrapped around the station and the truth hidden inside the officer's note slowly reached toward us through the rustling paper where names and small details waited patiently beneath the lantern glow, while Sarah's calm breathing beside me carried the steady rhythm of someone who endured long seasons of hardship without losing the gentle light inside her soul. and the gathered townspeople listened closely as Thomas followed the final lines written on the fragile page, describing the stranger who once walked through this town wearing the same uniform and carrying a past that quietly crossed paths with our lives long before the battle changed everything. While the officer's careful handwriting revealed that the fallen soldier had spoken often about a place where kindness still lived among ordinary people, and that memory guided him toward this frontier town during the last peaceful weeks before war pulled him away. While the wind brushed softly against the lantern above us, and Thomas prepared to read the final portion of the letter, where the stranger's story connected with Sarah's long vigil beside the station, and the deeper truth waiting behind the mistaken message slowly began rising from the page as the silent crowd leaned closer into the circle of warm light, and the fragile document continued to unfold in Thomas's trembling hands as the quiet town listened for the next words that promised to reveal how the life of that unknown soldier and the fate of Sarah's home became tied together in ways no one in this listening street had ever fully understood. While the lantern flame swayed again, and the officer's final sentences started to appear beneath Thomas's careful voice, and the long hidden path of this mystery stretched forward into the deepening night, where our story continued opening step by step beside the empty tracks of the waiting station, and the truth prepared to travel even further through the listening town and into the uncertain hours ahead, where patience, courage, and love stood ready to face whatever revelation waited beyond the next line of the letter, now resting beneath the lantern glow in Thomas's shaking hands. Thomas's fingers tightened around the fragile letter. The lantern above us swayed gently, casting long shadows across the wooden street. Everyone waited. Even the wind seemed to pause. Thomas lowered his eyes to the page again. His voice came slower now, as if every word carried the weight of years. The soldier who fell in that battle carried a small journal. A soft murmur passed through the crowd. Thomas continued reading. In the journal, he wrote about this town. My brow tightened. The stranger had never lived here, yet his story somehow circled back to this place. Thomas turned the page carefully. The soldier wrote about a woman he saw once near the station. Sarah's fingers froze inside my hand. Lantern light reflected in her eyes. Thomas spoke the next line with quiet astonishment. He described her kindness. My heart skipped. The crowd leaned closer. Thomas read slowly. She shared warm bread with a tired traveler on a winter morning. Sarah's breathing grew softer. A memory flickered across her face. Thomas looked up. That traveler was the soldier who later joined the same regiment as you. The air grew heavy. Thomas continued. He wrote that her kindness reminded him of home. The crowd stood completely silent now. In his journal, he wrote her name. Thomas paused. Lantern light trembled again. Sarah. A quiet gasp spread through the people. Sarah lowered her head. Her voice came like a whisper carried on warm wind. I remember that man. Her eyes drifted toward the dark railway tracks. He looked lost and very tired. Thomas nodded slowly. He carried that memory with him through the war. My chest tightened again. The quiet story of a simple act now reached across battlefields and years. Thomas turned to the final lines. The officer believed the mistaken identity happened because the soldier borrowed a coat during the freezing night before the battle. A distant dog barked somewhere down the road. Thomas folded the journal note slowly. Your uniform coat was missing from the supply wagon that evening. Understanding began forming like dawn light inside my mind. Sarah's kindness had unknowingly crossed paths with fate itself. The stranger carried her memory into war. His death carried my name back to this town. The crowd remained still, absorbing the truth. Sarah looked up at the stars slowly appearing above the valley. Her voice carried quiet wonder. a small moment of kindness traveled very far. Thomas stepped closer again, while the lantern light glowed softly across the listening faces, and the deep silence of the frontier town held the fragile story between us, where the life of a stranger and the patience of a waiting woman had woven together through war, misunderstanding, and time, while the railway tracks stretched into darkness like a long road of unanswered questions, and the document resting in Thomas's hands still carried a few lines unread beneath the folded edge of the paper, where the officer had written one final observation about the stranger's journal, describing another place inside this town where the soldier once returned before leaving for war. And Thomas slowly opened that last crease of the page, revealing the name of a small building near the edge of the valley, where the stranger spent his final peaceful evening speaking with someone whose memory remained quietly hidden inside the town all these years, while the wind moved across the station again, and Thomas lifted his eyes toward the dark road leading beyond the church tower and the old stable where shadows gathered beneath the lantern glow, and Sarah's hand remained steady in mine as the final part of the letter prepared to reveal the person who shared that last conversation with the soldier whose borrowed coat changed the course of our lives, and the watching townspeople leaned closer into the circle of warm light, while Thomas drew a careful breath and began reading the next line that slowly carried the story deeper into the quiet frontier night, where our past continued opening step by step beneath the swaying lantern beside the waiting tracks, and the truth hidden inside that final memory prepared to move through the gathered crowd and into the fragile moment unfolding between Sarah and me as the officer's handwriting guided Thomas's voice toward another revelation, resting patiently inside the faded paper, while the town listened with growing curiosity, and the lantern flame flickered softly above us as the next name written in the stranger's journal slowly rose from the page and entered the silent air of the frontier evening, where our story continued stretching forward into the darkness of the valley and the long night ahead, where more forgotten memories still waited to step out from the shadows and join the fragile circle of light surrounding us beside the quiet station, where love, patience, and unexpected kindness continued shaping a destiny far greater than any of us once imagined.
The night grew quiet. Stars shimmered above the town like distant lanterns, guiding lost travelers home. Sarah squeezed my hand gently. Her eyes reflected the soft light, calm and unbroken after years of waiting. Thomas folded the journal carefully and placed it back into his satchel. "I should have delivered this truth sooner," he whispered, voice low. I shook my head. "It is here now," I said, "and it matters more than the delay." The townspeople slowly stepped closer. An old woman lifted her shawl and smiled at Sarah. A child offered a bundle of flowers from the corner of the street. Kindness had returned quietly, as it always did, when hearts remained open. Sarah stood. She brushed the dust from her coat and straightened her back, not as a woman broken by hardship, but as one strengthened by patience, courage, and love. I held her face in my hands. "I am here now," I said softly. Her smile was quiet, tender, filled with the weight of years endured. We walked together down the old wooden street. The town seemed warmer tonight, as if the very walls of the buildings remembered hope. Every person who had witnessed the moment felt it, the invisible thread connecting all of us through compassion and understanding. I realized then that life did not always unfold as planned. Sometimes love was tested by distance, loss, and silence. Sometimes truth came late. But kindness, patience, and resilience always carried people through the hardest storms. Sarah's waiting had taught me something deeper than victory or loss. It was the quiet endurance of the human heart, the gentle courage to keep loving even when the world forgets you. We reached the station steps. The wind carried the scent of spring blossoms, and for the first time in years, the station felt alive with promise. I looked at Sarah, the woman who had never abandoned hope. Her eyes held a gentle wisdom that life's greatest strength is not in wealth, fame, or power, but in the hearts willing to endure, to forgive, and to care.
And in that moment, I understood the truth beyond the war, beyond loss, beyond fear. Every act of kindness echoes farther than we know. Every patient heart writes stories stronger than any letter, any message, any mistake. Love, sincerity, and understanding are what remain when everything else fades. We stepped into the night together, hand in hand, ready to rebuild, to forgive, and to walk forward, carrying the lesson of hope, courage, and compassion that would guide every step we took from that day forward.